Welcome back. We're going to work in Illustrator a little bit. Today we're going to create a donut, a nice springtime or a fall, we'll say a fall picnic donut. So let's start and go ahead and get into Illustrator. We're going to create a new file, and it can be a letter size. That'll be fine. We'll make a portrait just for fun this time to mix it up a little. And we're going to call this donut. Now this is going to be a little bit of a longer session, so we're going to have to divide it into a couple. And so you're going to watch this video first, and then you'll watch a continuation shortly afterwards, or whenever you want to afterwards. But you can watch it right away or whenever you want to. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm sorry about the background voices too. I'm doing this today in my office, and there are people around that are talking. They're a little bit loud, so you might hear a little murmuring in the background. So just try to avoid that. Now what we're going to do is create a donut image that's going to have a tablecloth and a table. It's also going to have a donut and a plate and all the shadows and everything that you would expect to see with that. The first thing that we're going to do is go to our window, to our layers palette. This will be important. I'm going to make 3 different layers here. Our first layer, we're going to double click where it says layer 1. We're going to call this table, T-A-B-L-E, as opposed to T-A-B-E-L. Create that. Then we'll come down here, or we can go to the pop-up menu right here and create a new layer. Either one will work. This one we'll call our plate layer. And then finally we'll create a 3rd layer, and we're going to call this our donut layer. So we've got these 3 layers. Now we'll work on our table layer first, and so what I'm going to do is come over here and lock these other 2 layers just to ignore them for a little while, because we want to make sure that we're working on our table layer. The first thing we're going to do is create our table. So I'm going to get a rectangle tool, and I'm going to drag over this whole shape. And then my fill color, I'm going to make a brown. Get rid of the stroke on. I don't like having a stroke if I don't have to. That's great. It's a fine table. The problem is it's kind of bland. It's all one color. So we're going to start to work with gradients, changing one color to another color within an object. So let's go to Window, Gradient, and right here, this swatch represents an available gradient or color that we can use. And you'll see you've got a couple of others here. Just ignore those. They're really kind of junky gradients that they put in there. I don't know why, but they have them in there. We're going to create a gradient here. Now, what I'm going to do with this box selected, if I click on that gradient, you'll see it goes from white to black. Just like this goes from white to black. Now, I want you to observe the left side as I drag this slider. Watch what changes. This represents the area of the gradient, where that starts and where it ends. This represents where that color is 100%. So it's 100% white here, and then it starts to go to black. You've got 100% white here that starts to go to black there as well. Here is black. We go black to white. Now if I drag this, you're going to see that change. Here's our transition. Here's that transition right here. This diamond on top represents the halfway point between those colors, or 50%. So you'll see that I'm going to get a really strong transition here because of that very small space between there. If I drag it over, you're going to see it even more so, like that. So that represents half. Now, these colors can change. If I can either double click on this, and it will give me the opportunity to give a different color, or I can go to my swatches and drag around there by clicking on that. Okay. The other option, and this is perhaps an easier option, is simply to click on swatches and drag that color down to there. Now you'll notice this transition from red to black is not a particularly good transition, because as our red starts to fade, we come to black, but our black is starting to fade, and so we're getting kind of this muddy gray area in here. If I'm going to have a color transition to another color, typically I want them to be like colors, like green to blue, or yellow to green, or yellow to orange, or something like that. If that isn't the case, I need to create sort of an analogous color. In this case, I'm going to come to black, and I'll double click on that, and I'm going to go to I'm in my colors palette, so I'm going to switch this to CMYK, and I'm going to add a bunch of magenta and a bunch of yellow. And that will change this actually, instead of a black, to a black with red in it. And now you'll see this really nice transition of color here. Well, that's my gradient right now. That's the basis of a gradient. And there are a couple of different forms. This is a linear gradient. This is a radial gradient. Now you can swap these colors by simply clicking here, and it will reverse that gradient. If we go to linear, it will reverse that gradient there. This always represents where your gradient starts. This represents where it stops. Well, unfortunately, you don't always want to have it. You don't always have it at that perfect angle. And so that's what the gradient tool is for. You'll see, I'm going to pull this back up so we can see it. Here's the left side, and here's the right side. Okay, this is where the gradient starts. This is where it ends. If I get that gradient tool, and I click here and start dragging, this is where the gradient starts, up here, and where I let go is where it ends. And so you'll see that transition now going from the top to the bottom right corner. If I click here and drag, the area at the bottom left will be red because that's where I end. Then at the top right will be black because that's where I start. Now I can control how long I do this as well. If I click here and drag to here, then it's going to give me just a short gradient. I can click on this and extend that a little bit. In fact, I can click and extend it clear out here, and that gradient will blend over that space. I could even click out here to start and click here to finish, and I'll get a really gradual gradient over that space. Okay. Now I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see. If we change this to radial and do the same thing with the gradient tool. This represents the starting color, the finishing color, and this is the extent. That circle around here is the extent of that gradient. I can make it longer. I can make it shorter. Things like that. I can even adjust by clicking here where the center focus of that gradient is. Now we'll see some practical applications for that a little bit later. Okay. Right now, let's just suffice it to say we want a gradient that's for our table. So what I'm going to do is make the left gradient. I'm going to click up here. I'm going to drag from my swatches down here and create that dark brown. To get a lighter brown, click and drag that to here. Now I can click with my gradient tool up here in the left corner, and I'm going to drag it down. So I've got this nice general gradient. So I want you to do that. If you need to, you can pause and come back and stuff like that to be able to resolve this. Okay. Now, at this point, what I want you to do is we'll leave that gradient, but we're going to have other chances to work with the gradients. We're going to create a pattern. We want to create a tablecloth that goes over, you know, this, we'll say, like this. Our tablecloth is going to look about like that. We'll make it white for right now. Well, that's an ugly color. We'll make it red for right now. But what I really want is one of those cool tablecloths that go that are red and white checked. Well, the thing about this is it's at an angle. I can go ahead and create a bunch of squares and just copy them and paste them and change it and make this one white, and then select this and copy it or drag it and duplicate it and make it red, and so on. I can do all those things, but the problem is that because it's at an angle, those shapes are not going to fit in there perfectly. So what we're going to do is create a pattern here. Now this is actually really, really easy, and you're going to see how to do it. But to do this, push your space bar, and I want you to drag that page to the right a little bit. Now I'm going to make a square, and it's going to be a perfect square. I'll push the Shift key, so it's a perfect square. Now I'm going to go ahead and select that square and drag it to the right until it borders the other shape. And then I'm going to select both of these and drag them down till they border that. So we've really got 4 different shapes. And I'm going to zoom in so we can see what's going on here a little better. Now you'll notice we've got a little bit of a gap here. So I'm going to go to View, Outline, and select these two, select those 2 objects. And I'm going to zoom in really close, press the spacebar and Command key. And now I can click and drag these so they line up perfectly, like that. And I'll zoom out a little bit, push Command Y or go to View, Preview, and show me. Now I'm going to make this one here sort of a pink color. I'm going to come down to my color swatches, and I'm going to push Shift and hold Shift down and start dragging, and you'll notice that it will drag all those colors proportionally. So I want to be able to drag those and create that color. Now, with that color made, I'm going to select this, and I'm just going to drag it over there to put in that part. And then finally, I'm going to get my white, I'm going to click and drag that down to here. So I've got the basis of this created. Now, what I want to do at that point, instead of trying to copy them and paste them and copy and paste them, which will take too long, and again, it won't be as flexible to come in and do that and then do it again over and over. That takes too long, and I'm kind of lazy. So instead, what I'm going to do is select those 4 objects, and I'm going to drag that to my swatch palette. And you'll see a new swatch appear right there that represents those 4 objects. We've created a pattern now. So if I push Command 0, it will get me back into my screen. I can select this object, and then I can go ahead and click on my new pattern swatch, and it will give me that pattern. You'll see it's a perfect pattern. Now I can come in here to my rotate tool. I'll double click on that. I don't want to rotate my object. Instead, I just want to rotate my pattern. I'm going to rotate it about, let's say 35%, and hit OK. Now, this doesn't match exactly, so I can either go back and adjust the angles of that rotation, or what I'm going to do, because I'm kind of lazy, I'm going to click and drag this anchor point straight up until it meets right there. And then I'm going to select this one, and I'll drag it out a little far so I can see where it's coming. And I'll drag it back to this point so that I've got it following that line perfectly. And I've got a little bit of an edge, which is fine. I'm not worried about that because nothing's perfect, right? So there's my table.